I am delighted to be joined for the second episode of the CIDO Means Business Podcast series by entrepreneur and owner of Wilson's Country, Angus Wilson. Since starting the potato business from the 6-acre family farm in County Armagh in the 80s, Angus has developed the business through passion, innovation and clever marketing to become one of the market leaders within the potato processing industry in Ireland. He sells to retailers, food service and food manufacturers with own label and branded pre-packed, peeled and convenience potatoes. So sit back, relax and find out about Angus Wilson's history of selling spuds. Angus, thanks very much for coming along today to CIDO to take part in our podcast series here. Now, I just want to run through a few things with you, and if you could tell me a wee bit about how the business got started. You founded Wilson's Farm in the 80s, is that right, or was that from your parents?
Well, the Wilson's Farm was going back a few generations. I actually don't need to go back into the family tree to see where I fitted into it, but I came home to the family farm in 1986. I'd studied. Well, I was in Edinburgh and did agriculture, did the HND in agriculture. I'm not sure I studied too hard, but I was there and enjoyed life there and came back home to the farm in 86. And back in those days, it's hard to imagine how business was so tough in those days in terms of interest rates. My dad had broken out in 1979, had bought a farm. And but crazily, just around that time, interest rates went through the roof, and we ended up with having a debt on the farm at 16.75% interest rate. So by the time I came home, that was 79. By the time I came home in 86, there was a fair bit of debt on the farm, and it was challenging, and we were suffering from that early fixed rate debt that we had. So my incentive to come home was to see what else I could do on the farm to boost the income, and not for me to be a drain on it, but to build it up. And the first thing that I did was, it was a dairy farm, but I also had seen an advert in the local paper for goat's milk. There was a local creamery looking for goat's milk to supply, and I thought we could do this. We could use the goats to graze the same land as the cows, and it would be something a wee bit different. Yeah. Did that for a while. Was supplying the creamery with frozen milk. We froze the milk at home and then delivered frozen milk to a cold store for the creamery to use. Okay. But then I also on a Monday and a Thursday started going around shops, delivering my goat's milk around the shops, and that was going okay. But I was then looking for other things that I could sell. I got a wee Renault extra van, and I wanted to fill my van. And there was a neighbour growing potatoes, growing them without fertiliser, and they were quite flowery potatoes, and people loved them. And I started selling those as well, loose, and there was a few shops took them on board, and that's where the business began all those years ago, selling those fertiliser-free potatoes. The goats were gone after a couple of years, and we focused on developing the potatoes.
So it was a neighbouring farm was growing the potatoes, and then you sold them initially, and then
I marketed them for the neighbouring farm, and then I went to one or two other farmers to get them to grow them in a similar way without fertiliser. Right. But and my slogan in those days was, I called them Wilson's Country garden potatoes, because they were grown as you would grow them in the garden. And quite often farmers in those days were putting a lot of fertiliser on their crop to get a big yield, but then they didn't have the quality. Whereas because you weren't forcing them with lots of fertiliser, they didn't grow as fast, and they had a higher, technical term is they had a higher dry matter, there was less water in them, but they just tasted lovely and flowery and fluffy. So I had a story to tell about them, because they were grown as you grow them in the garden. They were grown fertiliser free, but whenever people tasted them, they did taste different, and they were called Wilson's Country garden potatoes. Taste the difference. That was my slogan.
You were very ahead of your time in the 80s. I mean, now people are looking for products which are organic and, use less fertilisers and all the rest of it. So to do that in the 80s, especially in a time when interest rates were so high, you pivoted your business and changed and grew the business to try and get rid of any debt. That's really pertinent now with the way interest rates will inevitably continue to increase.
But ironically, at the moment, we're worried about interest rates going up by 0.5% to is it 1 3/4? I think it is now. So I mean, it does
Totally
put it in context.
Yeah.
But obviously, there's other headwinds in the economy at the moment that are a lot to worry about as well.
Yeah, inflation and cost of living crises. So take me from there. You were selling. How many different farms did you use to grow these potatoes?
Well, initially we had 3 local farms, really contacts that I had, and they grew the potatoes. I kind of give them advice on how to grow them in terms of fertiliser free and so on, and how to do that. But then they grew them and then I marketed them. And that happened over the first sort of 3 or 4 years of the business. As I get more customers, then I needed more response to supply them. And actually, in those days, I felt I had absolutely no right to be in the potato market. So I was incredibly careful with my wee bag and my brand to try and do it really, really well, so that people would get to know it and would associate the name Wilson's Country with quality.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you have a premises, were you employing anybody directly at that point?
Probably in the later 80s. The premises was the family farm.
Yeah.
And we built 1 or 2 extra sheds on the family farm, and then eventually we sold the dairy herd and concentrated on the potatoes on the farm. My dad was getting near retiring age at that stage, and the farm became focused not so much on growing the potatoes, because our land wasn't particularly suited to growing potatoes, but more for the packing and processing. We did that all on the family farm, and the potatoes were grown, some within a reasonably close, maybe 5-10 miles away, but then some went to County Down, which again was getting into better soil types to grow a better crop there.
Great. And then, so you now employ, was it over 70 people in the business?
At the moment,
we
employ between part-time and full-time nearly about 135.
Oh wow, so it's increased since. And you're based here in Craigavon, and how many farms then would you use now across Northern Ireland?
We have about 25 growers across Ireland, really, rather than just Northern Ireland. And with the regions, the main regions would be, again, County Down still there, up Derry, Donegal, Meath, Wexford, down in that part of the world, Louth. So we cover all of the island. It tends to be more so the east coast, because the better soil types are on the east coast. Albeit that there's some great soils up in Donegal as well, and Derry, but mainly the east coast.
And has the Brexit and the Northern Ireland Protocol had much of an impact on your business?
Well,
do you export?
I would have to be honest, I wasn't a fan of Brexit. I thought it was just, we had a European economy that seemed to work pretty well together, but have to accept Brexit has happened. And it hasn't, the protocol isn't a big problem to us in terms of day-to-day trading. We're able to bring product in as and when we need it, where we can't get it locally. But the big issue for us in terms of the protocol is we are not allowed to bring seed potatoes in from Scotland. And Scotland has just a geographical an environmental sort of strength there, that they can grow really good disease-free seed potatoes. And the whole of Ireland has orientated towards Scotland for high quality seed, so that's damaging the industry. And I really would like some sort of concessions that those seed potatoes could come from Scotland, but that's not looking likely in the short term anyway. But we'll see.
That's interesting. And how far do you export your potatoes? Do you go into the UK, the rest of the UK? And
really across the British Isles, from Cork in one direction to London in another, and across the British Isles. The majority of what we do, maybe 85%, is within the island of Ireland, but we do supply, we supply a lot of one supermarket we have a convenience line of peeled potatoes and peeled chips just ready for going in the oven, but with no oil or anything. They're fresh prepared, and they go across the British Isles with one particular supermarket chain.
Okay.
But we also supply a big food service distributor in London as well. So yes, we'll have a good coverage, but we could do more in GB.
Yeah.
And we have the protocol isn't stopping us supplying GB. There's no issues in our product going out. It's product coming back that can be an issue.
So you mentioned some of the diversified products that you have there to meet the convenience market, for example. Right. So have you got any? So you have your potatoes. You have pre-prepared, is it chips, like ready to, any other type forms?
Well, the business splits into 4 divisions actually. Now on our journey from those early days, we did do a lot of veg and we did a lot of fruit.
Okay.
We supplied a lot of food companies with veg ingredients for their added meals, and we did little fruit pots, retail fruit pots. But over time we decided we would focus purely on potatoes and try and be the best on the island with potatoes rather than trying to do too many things and not do them well enough.
Mm-hmm.
So the business is now entirely focused on potatoes, and our 4 divisions are pre-packed potatoes, which is still the largest part of the business, but an increasing second division is our food service supply, and we supply peeled potatoes, chipped potatoes, dice, slice, all sorts of potato products, again to hotels, restaurants, schools, prisons, whatever. So we do that across the island of Ireland and some into GB.
Okay.
Then the 3rd division is our convenience products. They're little pouches with peeled potatoes. We created a new brand called You Say Potato, trying to be slightly quirky and slightly more modern.
Yes.
And these have little pouches with peeled potatoes or chips or skinny chips or dice or slice in those, and they're really designed for one meal time.
Right.
And you can either put them into, for the chips, you can put them into an actifry, and you can control the amount of oil. If you buy a frozen bag of chips, you can't control the amount of oil in them.
True.
So for those that are worried about their intake or fat intake or whatever, they can just put a thimble of oil in along with their chips in an actifry, and they've got fresh chips with that chip taste, but without too much oil in them. So they're really handy, and they're doing really well across the British Isles.
And do you know what share of the market you have in Ireland per se?
I don't know that exactly. There's no specific figures to say exactly. We can guess at it, but I mean, maybe to finish off with the 4th division that we have, which is relatively small but maybe growing, is our blanched division, where we actually have our chips which we blanch off, so we part cook them, so they're really handy for the like of a chip van or a chip shop or whatever, that you just need to fry them off for the last 2 or 3 minutes, so it speeds them up in supplying their customers, and they're ready, especially the like of a chip van where you don't have much space to maybe peel potatoes or to cook them off and hold them and so on. So that's our 4th division. That was a business that we bought recently in North Island. There was a girl, Rosemary McConnell, had been running that business, and she now works with us.
Oh, great.
So it's a great wee business.
Bought that over.
So that's the 4 divisions, and it works well. So you asked me another question.
Yeah, just about the market share. I mean, I know it's difficult to kind of...
Well, maybe if I put it in context, within Northern Ireland, we probably would be the largest packer of, largest processor of potatoes in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
On the island of Ireland, we'd probably be one of 3, but we'd be up there within those 3. In terms of looking at the British Isles as a whole, certainly from a pre-packing point of view, we're very small. You know, we're feeding on the island here, what are we, sort of 6 million in total, and the Britain GB is 65-ish, somewhere in that region. So there are some very big players there, and they would pack on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock to quitting time would be what we would do in a week, so that we are small on that scale, which is one of our challenges too.
Yeah, but you still are exporting over to there, so that's fantastic as well. So what would you say is the most important lesson that you've learned over your career in business, running your own business?
Good question. Well, there's lots of answers to that, but there's a very old-fashioned one that we have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth, and I often go back to that because you need to be looking and listening all the time to what's going on in the marketplace and understand what's happening, how consumer trends are changing, what's happening out there in terms of the economy, and just trying to adjust what you do to what's happening out there, and to try and listen to all of your customers and understand where their hassles are, what is frustrating them, and try as best you can to deliver that. So yes, probably looking and listening would be the advice that I would give to anybody, and you actually need to be proactive about that. And one of the things that we have done in our business would be create focus groups where we would go out and try and be quite scientific about speaking to groups about what frustrates them, what they like about their spuds and their packaging and all of the offer, to try and understand how we can improve and how we can ensure that in the battle that there is with rice and pasta in the carbs world, that spuds is winning his fair share.
And it's difficult as a business owner to take criticism, but it's great that you're open to listen and to adapt and change, because that's how you're going to survive, ultimately. So that's a really good piece of advice, I think.
Yeah, well, if you put your head in the sand, it's not good.
Which lots of businesses do. They get very precious, about their product. So, what is there like a common myth about the food industry and potatoes in particular, that kind of you can debunk for us? Is there some kind of common myth that in the food industry, something that we could learn, teach us something that we wouldn't really know?
If ever there's an article on the news or in the paper or anything like that to do with spuds, they always attach the word humble to them. Right. I don't think spuds are humble. I think they're great. We've got varieties like British Queens or Dublin Queens, and there's King Edward, so I'm not sure that they're necessarily humble. They are, a term that some of the food experts would use, they're nutrient rich. And I guess I don't associate that with something that's humble. I understand where the terminology comes, because way back in the day, in famine days, the humble people of Ireland survived on spuds and the produce from a cow, and I guess that's where the terminology humble came from. But it was always said in the history books that the people of Ireland lived very healthily and were very strong on the basis of those 2 ingredients. So I always think that that's really good. Unfortunately, blight came as a disease that nobody understood then and wiped out the crops, so they'd lost half their diet, and hence all the traumas of the famine of the mid-1800s. But I don't think spuds are that humble. That's my myth that I'd like to crack. Yeah,
there is like a bit of an emphasis on eating fully fat products and eating a good balance of your diet instead of all these fat-free products and different things, and going back to maybe where we were a few years ago and having good fats and some carbohydrates, and having a good balance there is really important. What would you say is your biggest failure in business, and what did you learn from that experience?
My biggest failure was investing in property a few years ago, 2000 early 2000s, and I didn't appreciate risk. Because for a period of maybe 15 years before that, everything had been very rosy, and the food industry is a pretty small return on your capital invested, and we kind of understand that, and that you're quite often in commodity and you expect that, but I was looking outside of that to actually balance the risk that we had in the food industry, and I thought property looked like a good investment, but I didn't understand the value or what risk could be in lots of different sectors, and so I delved in and got my fingers burnt as a result of not appreciating the risk. That's way back in 2007 when the crash
hit. I was going to say.
And everybody, I mean, the banks were very keen to lend money, and I was quite happy to borrow it, and just didn't quite grasp what could happen. I think we all learned a lot through that, because there's lots of people got their fingers burnt, and business is all about risk, but it's managed risk. It's not going, and I overdid it.
Would you have seen yourself as risk adverse before that, or more risk adverse now from that experience?
I'm more risk averse now, but you can't be totally risk averse if you're in business, or you wouldn't get out of bed.
That's right.
So you have to take risks, but you need to manage the risk, and you need to understand if this and this and this go wrong, what's the consequences of that, so that you take a managed risk, and you know if the A, B and C all go wrong, that you can still survive it.
Yes.
And that's
a calculated risk.
Calculated risk, yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So that's probably the lesson that I learned, and it was a hard lesson, and there was some interesting conversations along the way to get those problems resolved.
Yeah, it seems to be, you know, over this past number of decades that there's every 15 years there's like a boom and a bust, and you know, could be coming up to that again when property prices are high, and you know, how high can they continue to grow before people can't afford them, you know. So you know, we have to keep an eye and look at the past and what's happened, and it's difficult. So tell me, Angus, what does your morning routine look like? What does your day entail as the owner of Wilson's Country?
Well, as the owner, it's probably quite varied. The business, as I said to you, there's over 130 employees, and quite often I see that somebody that maybe starts a business isn't necessarily the right person to day run that as it grows, because maybe the skills that are required to start it aren't necessarily the skills to put structure and put the systems and all is required to have a business that's run well, is run fairly for the staff, and has the structures there to make sure that quality is consistent and so on. And I suppose a few years ago I saw that I maybe wasn't the right person as the business continued to grow, to actually be the day-to-day owner of it. I really wanted to put a good team together that would run that well, and hence I stepped back from the day-to-day running maybe 10 years ago. And there's a guy, Lewis Cunningham, who took on the lead of running that and does that very well. And I support him, and I'm involved in some work outside of the business. I'm involved in a charity called Fields of Life that does work in East Africa, which I have loved, and it's been a great journey as well. So I do stuff outside of it, but I let him run it day to day, but then we're both, along with our senior team, very much involved in the strategic development of the business, and maybe looking for if there's acquisition opportunities, or there's whatever we need to do for the next steps to grow the business. But because Lewis is doing that day-to-day running, I have more time maybe to look at things that aren't just absolute the cold face.
And that's what it should be, you know, in your position. You know, your skills set, the requirements need to change as the business grows and develops, and if you have you know, over 130 staff, it's like, you know, the management of that in itself is very, you know, time consuming, and you should be involved in the strategic development, absolutely. What do you see sort of as the next steps for the business, any areas of growth for your particular business?
There's lots of things, but I don't want to tell you
I don't blame you.
Broadly, I can talk. I suppose there's one area I can talk specifically about. We are looking, I mean, obviously we mentioned earlier about the change and the headwinds that are coming into the economy, and one of them is the cost of energy. So one of the areas that we're looking at, and we're maybe just about to press the green button on, is to build an anaerobic digester to use the waste that comes out of the plant, or potato peelings and so on, to produce energy to go back in terms of electricity to run it. So the potato peelings and or maybe grass and so on will produce gas and use that gas to burn that off to create electricity to run the factory. So that's one of our big investments that we're looking very closely at the moment.
Great.
We have a plan, but we just need to make sure we have the funding for it. So that's one area. And then just looking at other areas that continue to make potatoes convenient. And we are more and more time poor. And spuds have so much to offer even in that time per area, but they are, if you take a bag of potatoes home and you peel it and so on, it does take a wee while. So we're looking at other ways to make that more convenient.
Yeah, and I suppose with a potato, if you're not using, the shelf life on them can't be that long if they're like peeled and pre-cut and things like that. So that's a challenge, I suppose.
That is a challenge. You have probably about 8 or 9 days shelf life once you peel them, as long as you keep them in a chilled environment. And keep oxygen away from them as much as possible. So yes, that is, but I mean, some people are very happy to peel spuds, others aren't. So it's something that we're fully aware of, that we need to continue to develop, and that's why our food service and our convenience side of the business is growing and is growing significantly. Yeah,
you have to adapt to the way people live, absolutely. Do you have any productivity hacks for entrepreneurs, or any advice and little things that you wish you had known back in the day that you would tell people to do now? I know you talked about, listen to your customers and that kind of thing, but is there any little productivity hacks and things that can make the business more productive?
Well, the first thing that you need to do is invest in good people. That's the key to any business. The business is the people. It's not the potatoes, it's not the machinery, it's not the building, it's the people. So having good people in a business is the secret to any business. And as a young, maybe entrepreneur that's starting out, you look at your own skill set and what you're good at and what you're not good at, and then you try to build a team around that. And for me, I'm not quite sure what I'm good at, but I know that we have built a really good, maybe what I'm good at is building a good team, and that's been absolutely key to the success of the business, is that team, and having really good people in every area, because nobody can be, if you're a generalist, you're not a specialist, and we need specialists in all the different areas, so that's a key. Then I suppose the next thing that I would do would be buying really modern, labour efficient machinery.
Yes.
So that stay modern and stay with the latest technology without going too far and not being a guinea pig for some of the equipment manufacturers out there, but getting the latest machinery, because if you don't solve today's problem today, it'll be annoying you tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So you need to continue to invest in your business to build it up. So good people and good machinery.
And you see, when you mention, the people in your business, do you find at the minute it's difficult to get the right kind of skills? I know that in lots of different industries here there are skills gaps, and we can't get the right people for these jobs coming up through university, or is that fit for purpose, some of these courses? How do you find in your industry, can you get the right people that you need?
It's a continuous challenge to get the right people. Now we have some brilliant people in the business that have been with us for a long time. We had a lorry driver just retired the other day, been with us 25 years, and his wife has been basically as long with us. So we have lots of people like that have been absolutely incredibly loyal, and that's what we want. But you're always wanting to bring new people and new talent in as well, and sometimes bringing new people in that have learnt a lot of skill in another business, that those skills then come transfer to ours, and that's excellent too, because you're learning from other businesses as well, other people do it. So our senior team would be quite a great mix of people that have been with us basically all their career, and those that have come to us from another industry, and I think that's a brilliant mix.
Good mix, yeah.
So at every level in the business, people coming from other areas is good, but people is one of the biggest challenges to continue to keep people, and there's so many opportunities out there, and somebody can drop a job today and pick one up tomorrow, so you really have to do your best to look after your staff and make the business as welcoming as possible, and as nurturing as possible, which is a challenge every day too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an employee's market at the minute. There's so many opportunities for them. If you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
Goodness sake, what a question.
Personally or in business, whatever you think.
I'm thinking hard about that one. So
That's
I want a good answer for it.
I know.
If I was to be remembered for one thing, well, I suppose in my life, my faith's very important to me, and I would like people to see that I lived out my faith in what I did, which is, that would probably be my answer, that I was consistent. I'm sure there's lots of times I haven't been, but that's what I try to do.
You're human, you have to try. Just try, yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good answer, absolutely. And, finally, I know I've kind of asked you this sort of question before, but if you could go back to your 18-year-old self, is there anything that you would change about the path that you chose or the way in which you did it? Anything that you would do differently? Going back to when you were young, even before you started the business?
Well, one thing, I wouldn't invest so much in property.
Oh, that's the one.
That's an easy one. My 18-year-old self, that is a long time ago. I sometimes I look back on the journey and how it evolved, and sort of those goats, and then the neighbour growing the spuds and so on, and I can't believe how the journey has unfolded, and I'm not sure that if I started out again, it wouldn't unfold in the same way. I just sometimes was in the right place at the right time, sometimes the wrong place at the wrong time. My 18-year-old self, I would certainly tell that person to live life to the full, to travel plenty, to work hard and to work smart, and to look after people along the way.
Good. And can you manage your own stress well, or is there any advice you could give to people running their own business who find it hard to deal with stress?
Well, I remember my dad, who was a farmer, once saying that he could sleep in his bed at night even the hay was flowing down the river, which is a very old farmer type expression. And I guess I'm reasonably fortunate, I'm reasonably laid back, and I don't stress too much, but I do stress no matter how you go. When there's worries and problems, you do stress. But I suppose exercising well is a great way of de-stressing, and probably trying to get your worries in context, because sometimes we get our worries out of context and we make them bigger in our head than they really are. And probably the other thing that I would say, always have 2 or 3 really good friends around you.
Yeah.
People that you can talk to, you can trust, and will give you the context when you can't see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, that's a lovely note to finish things up on. Thank you so much for joining us today. Yes, fantastic.
That was shorter than Paul Triton anyway.
Definitely.